It is a prime ingredient that fuels the fires of imagination. Amid countless eons past, it fanned a spark ignited by a primeval author, chiseling arcane petroglyphs across a dim cave wall. This life-giving current once grew papyrus for paper and dried vibrant oils brushed over canvas. Carried across the land since before the dawn of time, it is the breath that gave rise to dinosaurs and has since walked on the surface of the moon. Manifesting as a placid breeze, it stirs memories of childhood, or as a turbulent vortex, ripping up the pages of history. Powered by this influence, we dream, love, laugh, hate, and destroy. In short, live out our lives. A gust of this disturbance carries the potential to scatter fog surrounding the unknown. Drifting through frequencies of time and space, thin air is inhaled for the first time and exhaled at the last. Don't try to catch your breath. Sleek, red and chrome Mercedes Antigrav 731 twirled precariously end over end as it escaped the sinuous grasp of a strange, vaporous vortex that roped out from the conical smokestack of the American Star shipwreck. Dust, grime, and seawater-soaked clumps of sand and mud slung outward in all directions in a thick brown halo that splattered back down on the deck of the beached ocean liner, adding to the already advanced state of decay brought on by the relentless surf that had been battering the wreck since it ran aground here early in 1994. Not all that long ago, as it turns out. The now, in this case, being the late summer of the same year. As the Mercedes regained stable control, high in the sky above the island of Fuerteventura, the bird's-eye view revealed that the aft section of the ship was well on its way to collapsing beneath the ever-advancing waves. Now back under intelligent control, the driver adjusted the levitating automobile's pitch and started gradually decreasing altitude down a wide, sweeping arc on course to the sand and rock-strewn beachline. The car didn't touch down, but rather slowed, stopped, and hovered several inches above the ground, low enough that the driver or pilot could easily step down from the cabin. With a slight hiss of escaping air from the hydraulic hinges, the entire top of the Mercedes swung slowly open to a 45-degree angle, allowing sunlight to fall upon the gleaming, futuristic interior and a single passenger, clad in a leather jumpsuit and metallic VR faceplate. Releasing her safety harness, the driver paused for a moment, scanning the surroundings for signs of life, then carefully kicked over the lip of the door, planting a solid pair of knee-high boots on the rough-hewn terrain. The driver raised a gloved hand and tapped a tiny button on a headset, tucked securely into the cusp of the left ear.
Control. Are you receiving?
A female voice stated, strangely altered by a mix of static distortion and auto-tune.
Control. This is Kapera Imari. I've successfully arrived at the desired destination, albeit questionable as to the exact year, date, or time of my arrival.
I peeled the faceplate away from my head and tossed it back on the passenger seat of the car. Glancing outward at the shipwreck, I made a mental note of the fact that the vortex seemed to be stabilizing around the stack, and I was relieved that my return trip was reasonably insured. Stepping away from the car, I fixed my gaze upon the split midsection in ocean spray I knew would eventually claim this tragic specter of an alternate reality. The vacation getaway I once adored. The X marks the spot on the map of my dreams. Tate! I shouted across the surf. Tate, darling! Please, if you're here somewhere. It's Kapera. You know? Your soulmate? Love of your life, traveling companion, fellow passenger on the way to somewhere strange and wondrous? Cruel silence, my only reply. My resolve galvanized at the very least to go aboard and discover what I could about this wasting question mark. The reason why the American Star seemingly has two distinctly different futures. Okay, Tate, no time like the present, I suppose. Turning my back to the shoreline, I kicked a leg up through the doorway of the car and sat down. Swiping a finger across the dashboard heads-up display, I tapped a glowing indicator to close the hatch and belted myself in. Before initiating my ascent, I took another long look across the water and wondered what I might find there. Probably not Tate Addison, I conjectured, but with any luck, perhaps a clue as to his mysterious whereabouts. All right then, off we go. The anti-gravity nacelles beneath the chassis hummed and crackled with precisely concentrated electrical current, and the vehicle rose into the air like a flag on a flagpole. My Mercedes then slowly descended towards the bow of the American Star shipwreck, gliding down toward a landing I had already made a dozen times before, through the vertical cargo shaft and down into the hull. As the wreck loomed large through the cockpit glass, I realized that the opening was no longer a pristinely maintained hydraulic platform, but rather a corroded passageway, pockmarked with enough potential obstacles to inflict plenty of door dings to my finely maintained automobile. Sighing, I said, "Tate, my love, you owe me big time for this one." Of course, when my car hung suspended above the cavernous rectangular aperture, there was no attendant on duty to wave me in, and no platform in place to set down on. And so, without fanfare, I started my descent into what was left of the belly of the wreck. Much to my relief, the Mercedes was fully equipped with collision sensors on all four sides of the vehicle, and these fully automated nodes performed exactly as intended, nudging the car clear of any and all corroded, rust-caked surfaces on the way down. Nevertheless, a real sense of claustrophobia started welling up in my mind as I looked up at the rapidly shrinking sunlight framed beyond the shaft entrance high above. Adding to the unnerving situation, the Mercedes cabin speakers were capturing audio sound bites of any and all noises within earshot of the car's external microphones and playing them back on the cabin speaker system. Crashing waves, metallic creaks, shudders and groans, eerie ghost-like wind and rhythmic sloshing filled the compartment, digitally filtered for pristine clarity and giving me the distinct impression that I was now completely surrounded on all sides by very real danger. As the Mercedes inched its way carefully down the rotting cargo shaft, I decided to busy myself and focus more on the immediate business at hand, namely finding a way out of the radically altered sea-deck cargo hold once I landed there. The car had a complete guidebook of the American Star stored on board. There was a log of places visited, and I decided to put the esoteric tourist information to good use. A three-dimensional model of the ocean liner projected out from a holographic lens embedded in the center console, and did, in fact, display my current location, midway down the forward cargo access tunnel. As long as the ship hadn't been completely reimagined after refitted in Phuket, there should be a stairwell 7 parking positions distance from my reserved space, granting expedient access to just about anywhere on board, save the aft section, now completely split away and inaccessible. If my onboard chronological data was accurate, and I had no reason to doubt that it was, I was now near the year of 1994, several months after the SS American Star had grounded here in the Canary Islands during a failed towing attempt to Thailand. While this seemingly undeniable fact corroborated Tate's historical account, it didn't even begin to explain how, in my own time, the ship had been safely and uneventfully towed to Phuket, where it was restored to become my most cherished vacation destination for as long as I could remember. And I had been born in the year of 2063. Somewhere in the vast expanse of years, history had become vastly upended, the hows and the whys defining any sort of legitimate explanation. But then, that wasn't why I was here. Yours truly, Kapera Imari, had risked no less than my very existence in search of the love of my life, and now, like a character torn from the pages of a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story, I was hot on the trail and willing to stop at nothing to find him. Allowing myself to become completely lost in the moment, I thought of when Tate had unceremoniously tumbled backwards into my life. Using my dainty, well-manicured fingertips to shift the holographic projection to midship, I focused on the exact spot where I had been walking past him, near an identical holographic kiosk, and my lost love had lost his balance, bringing us together. A single tear fell down my cheek, and with it, stone-cold resolve set in. I switched off the hologram and focused once again at what I hoped would be a reasonably soft landing down on sea deck. Then, all at once, the Mercedes slapped down on the surface of the water, and the anti-gravity engines, completely submerged, shorted out with a brilliant flash and went offline. With that, all of the automobile's control systems likewise blinked out, including the electrically driven servos that raised the hatch. With the car quickly floundering in the flooded sea deck compartment, I knew I had only a few precious seconds before escape would prove extremely difficult. Swimming to the safety in the mucky, clouded water churning around the inside rusted chamber. Knowingly reaching into a recessed panel beneath the dash, I started twirling a small silver hand crank, releasing the hatch seal with a soft hiss. As soon as there was enough of an opening for me to squeeze through and crawl out, I abandoned my prized Mercedes and for a moment clung to the corroded metal wall to watch it unceremoniously bob like a top and then land with a resounding thud at the bottom of the cargo hold. Just a rippling red outline shifting to and fro in time with the vicious, unrelenting tide. Now, undeniably committed to an immediate course of action, I peered up through the passage for any sign of a way out. Alarmingly, the shaft seemed to offer no easy method of escape, save a small segment of bent metal a few feet above my head. Scrambling up, I quickly reached out and caught hold of the bent shard and pulled myself through the opening with an adrenaline-fueled outburst of energy, landing sprawled on my back on the floor of a corridor that seemed to run full circle around the cargo shaft. "Welcome to the SS American Star," I chided. "The liner to the stars."
Respectfully presented for your objective scrutiny, a time traveler. One Kapera Imari, female in her mid-20s, hair black, skin and eyes brown, born April 11th, 2063, in Johannesburg, South Africa. Of course, by way of her particular moment of arrival, kicking and screaming as she plopped down on good old planet Earth, Miss Imari hails from the future. We point out this rather obvious detail so as to suggest that perhaps she has, or will have, the collective know-how to take up this perilous pastime, said know-how being the construction and operation of that somewhat whimsical contraption known by the likes of H.G. Wells as a time machine. Based on the collective modus operandi that has just now unfolded, it is difficult to say whether or not this passenger has arrived at her destination by her own design or through the auspices of a random chance. Either way, her mission plan would seem indelibly etched, crystal clear within her mind's eye. To seek out and find her desired traveling companion, Mr. Tate Addison, gone missing during their mutual stay at a luxury floating hotel in Phuket, Thailand. Due to the events that have just transpired, it could be said with a high degree of accuracy that Miss Imari has joined the unfortunate few currently classified as lost. Now then, in all fairness, perhaps we need to take a moment and flip that shiny silver coin, the one in her shirt pocket she holds so very close to her heart, the one tiny relic offering indisputable proof that Tate Addison ever really existed at all. Of course, you and I know that he does. We know from the past, present, and future experience that he is most likely out there, somewhere on the other side of an hourglass, actively engaged in his own ongoing search for the SS American Stars passenger who has just boarded for a one-way whirlwind trip into thin air. Stand by, Kapera. We'll be back shortly to see how you're enjoying your cruise. I stand here, holding the nozzle of a gas pump in the tank of my 1977 Jeep CJ5, watching the digits rack up to more than $100 for a full tank of regular unleaded. Ever since my unceremonious return to society a year ago, I haven't given much thought to rising gas prices, primarily because I never had enough time in a day to go anywhere. COVID had rendered me a captive in my own home, working remotely and riding out the pandemic high in the Rocky Mountains in the little town of Ouray, Colorado. Finally, with the numbers gradually declining and with plenty of PTO racked up, I decided that perhaps I was ready to give the vacation thing another try. Day-to-day monotony was giving me far too much time to sit and lament about the events that happened in the Canary Islands and the subsequent loss in the end. No matter how much time has gone by, the image of my dearest Kapera has never faded. On the contrary, she remains a shining beacon, a beckoning image, unforgettable, forever etched within the deepest reaches of my heart. The pump handle switched off in my hand, indicating that the tank was full, and a moment later I was back on the road to Fort Lauderdale. Being a native of Colorado, the gradual appearance of palm trees and other tropical foliage along the dark stretch of highway reminded me that I was getting close to an ocean again, and that thought alone was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. Above all, it would be a welcome break in the monotony and a chance to soak up some sun, hopefully transforming my now pale complexion into something a little more lifelike. My home in Ouray was a long distance back in my rearview mirror now, and I suppose this could be considered progress by my therapist. Just get in your car and drive had been her prescription for me. Don't ask where, why, or how. No map to guide you, no destination, Tate, she told me. You'll know it when you get there. So, when the roadside sign telling me I was closing in on a tourist hotspot presented itself, I decided that this was where I needed to go, a beach, an ocean, and plenty of people to keep me company. Oh, and one more thing. No derelict ocean liners run aground anywhere nearby. Like it or not, the sea was calling me back. Somewhere, beyond the sea, Kapera was waiting for me to find her. This time no random undertow to carry me away from her. This time, I would find her on my own terms. By the time I rolled my Jeep to a stop outside the office of the Shorewinds Beach Motel, the sun was just breaking across the water, brilliant early morning rays of persimmon, sparkling on the crests of breaking surf. A glowing neon sign above the door read, "Vacancy." Yeah, I thought to myself, this could be the place. 20 minutes later, I had my trunks on and was making my way to the beach to get an early start on some quality R&R. The sandy stretch was, for the most part, deserted in both directions, save an elderly man with a metal detector, combing the random seashells and scattered clumps of seaweed for little bits of treasure. His efforts suddenly reminded me of my own found object, my shiny memento from the American Star shipwreck that I had given to Kapera Imari as a promise of my love for her. The coin that now existed far out into the future. I waited in the grass and tall reeds for him to pass by, swiping the somewhat antiquated device side to side until he was out of earshot, then flip-flopped my way down to the water's edge and sat down to watch the sunrise. I suppose I should have been comforted by his presence. Company on a lonely beach. unlike that fateful day I waded out in the tide on Fuerteventura. Here, now, there was nothing to see but the view. No hulking shell crumbling under the constant battering of waves, and no vaporous conduit leading to an alternate dimension. Nothing that held the promise of leading me back to Kapera. Sighing, I laid back in the sand and closed my eyes, letting the warm breeze course over me, gentle gusts that tasseled my hair and tugged at the collar of my button-down shirt. Why had I returned to the sea? Of course, it could be said that I simply drove until I ran out of road, but then, I knew better than that. The sea holds some kind of piece to the puzzle. Ah, hell. Who am I kidding? The sea, the mountains, the Baikonur Space Center in Kazakhstan? Random sides of a scrambled Rubik's Cube. None of it makes any sense at all, other than the fact that the American Star shipwreck had been the focal point. A nexus that, for whatever reason, provided a way in. COVID notwithstanding, it has been far more than a year now since I left Fuerteventura, time enough to watch from a distance, by way of photographs posted on the internet, as the nexus point broke apart and finally floundered beneath the relentless tide. For all intensive purposes, the only known opening was gone. The whys and the hows that made the American Star a connection to elsewhere remain as elusive as a Sasquatch that tried to throw me under a train, metaphorically speaking. The truth is that the adventure is over, and this little odyssey of mine is just another dead end. I could feel the tears welling up in the corners of my eyes, as they have countless times before, essentially every time that I arrive at the same inescapable conclusion. Kapera is gone. One or two trembling heavy sighs later, anger set in. A dark witch's brew of frustration, helplessness, and insurmountable loss that drove me to claw at the sand and hurl 2 handfuls into the air, grit that simply rained back down on top of me and added insult to injury. "Useless," I shouted. "This is not restful. This is torment." In my case, trying to get away from it all is just a painful reminder that I will never see the love of 1,000 lifetimes again. As the dial ticked up on something just shy of outright rage, I stood up, ready to chuck my travel items back in the Jeep and start for home, when I happened to look down and notice movement nearby. Focusing on the source, I saw a tiny fiddler crab skittering away from the tide, apparently heading for higher and drier ground. "Hey there, little fella," I said, crouching back down. "Where are you headed?" The crab kept on scrambling past me on his way to a large shelf of drifted sand, but for some reason, one of his legs seemed to be dragging behind, as if hung up on something. Squinting, I noticed that the leg was, in fact, pulling along some kind of delicate silver chain or necklace. Part of the chain had become wrapped tightly around the last joint on the fiddler's back leg, and was making it nearly impossible to crawl. "It'd be a lot easier to get where you're going without this thing in tow," I said, taking hold of the chain. Of course, the crab continued to try to skitter in the opposite direction, making it a bit of a challenge to untangle what was essentially a pint-sized ball and chain. Ultimately, our little tug-of-war concluded, the crab finally free of his cumbersome burden, and I, feeling as though I'd done my good deed for the day. Without giving the item much thought, I stuffed it into the pocket of my pants and turned to face the motel and grounds. Bright sunlight now bathed the flamingo-pink bungalows in rich technicolor, contrasting against the cobalt blue sky above and framed on all sides by gently swaying palm trees. Okay, numbnuts. Give it one day lounging by the pool with a Mai Tai before you commit to another marathon drive back to Rocky Mountain High.
You ever wonder about the nature of things?
The gruff, raspy voice from somewhere behind me on the beach was startling. Certainly, whoever was speaking was now speaking directly to me, based on the obvious absence of another living soul anywhere in sight. Turning on a dime, I found myself standing face to face with the old man I'd seen before, the one absent-mindedly trolling the sand for little bits of buried treasure. Now his metal detector was haphazardly slung over one shoulder, having apparently served its purpose for the day. "I'm sorry, what?" I responded. "The nature of things?" There was an old, weather-worn lifeguard tower a short distance over his left shoulder, and the wind blowing in off the ocean just happened to whip up at that particular moment, flapping a tattered beach towel tied high up on the arm of the elevated chair. The aging man tipped his head to one side, his silhouetted outline eerily unnatural, almost etheric, with the bright yellow-orange halo of rim light burning his shape against the sky, while shadowing the details of his face.
You believe in reincarnation, young man? Heaven? Hell? The afterlife?
Before I had a chance to respond, he went on.
You ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, you and I are already gone, ashes in a jar on someone's mantle? Memories left over and refusing to accept the grim reality that this,
he gestured with his outstretched arms,
is all just an echo of a life lived out long ago. A destination, not a journey. Regret for dreams unrealized. Goals that were never reached. Love lost.
The old man's last bullet point item really hit me where it hurt, and I backed away from him, ready to turn tail and run if he kept on trying to rip out my heart and discard it in the sand at my feet. "What do you know about my life?" I shouted back at him. "Nothing is certain, okay? Life is a jigsaw puzzle. Little fragments you try to make fit, or at the very least, make sense of, from the cradle to the grave." The old man chuckled under his breath.
Perhaps,
he acknowledged reluctantly.
Then again, tell me there aren't a whole host of nagging questions filling that dark corner of your brain, the ones that seldom try to challenge the quote, end quote, logical explanations for that which cannot be logically explained. Déjà vu, for example. The sense that you've been someplace before. Who's to say that you haven't? Who's to say that this time around isn't just a residual mirror image of something that really did happen before? A ghost of an experience already having unfolded between the opposing poles of your birth and death. Are you riding an ocean liner, a train? Are you reaching for the stars or grounded somewhere in the dim, dark past? And one more thing. Is love eternal, timeless? Seems to me you need answers, and you're not going to find them stretched out here with your head in the sand.
The old man shook his head as if dumbfounded by my lack of action, then lowered his metal detector, switched on the power, and started shuffling away. After he had walked a short distance, he turned and called back over his shoulder.
You'd better have a look at that little item in your pocket, Mr. Addison. The one that I overlooked on the way by.
He exclaimed as he continued out of sight behind the guard tower.
Maybe not a newly minted coin. Still, it could be one of those puzzle pieces you mentioned.
I knew the layout of the ship. Knew it quite well. Or what was left of it, that is. The state of the shipwreck was appalling and tragic, certainly compared to how I had come to know it in the future, gleaming and fully restored in every detail. Now this grim alternate reality, the one from which Tate Addison had apparently emerged, was sprawled out before me, a dead hulk that should not have been. Now I stood disbelieving in the ransacked ship theater, its once shining silver screen brutally shredded and hanging limp across the floor beneath the back wall. Only 5 of the deco-styled folding chairs still remained bolted to the aisles, and those all badly tarnished, their seat cushions and plush velvet backrests torn, exposing tufts of mildewed padding within. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the emptiness as I made my way around the darkened chamber, all the while recalling the multitude of incredible films I had seen here from the time I was a small child. Finally deciding that reminiscing was just turning nostalgia into sadness, I retreated into the long hallway leading aft, intent on knowing the fate of several other key locations elsewhere on the wreck, namely the Pacific Restaurant and the Great Lounge, the 2 most sentimental rooms on board, at least for me, of particular significance because they were the places I had shared with Tate, a romantic dinner and an unforgettable moment in his arms, dancing to Somewhere Beyond the Sea. An unnerving series of labored creaks and groans from somewhere deep down in a broken lower deck made me quicken my stride, and a few moments later I was standing at what was once the elegant entryway to the Pacific dining room. Here, now, the space was almost completely impassable. The outer wall on the far side of the room was breached. A gaping hole split across a large section of the hull on the port side through which torrents of water surged in with the rhythmic and relentless advancing tide. A stray wine bottle, carried along in the shifting current, swirled by where I was standing, close enough that I could reach out and catch it. The label had long since soaked through and peeled off, rendering the vintage unknown. I once again felt a tinge of melancholy for a moment of absolute bliss that was now forever lost in time. With a heavy sigh, I dropped the bottle back in the water and watched it bob like it was a top as it floated out near the approximate location in the room where Tate and I had dined. Still tormented by loss, I focused my gaze out through the twisted metal wall and thought how poignant it was. The ship, my heart, both broken.
I didn't bother unloading my luggage. I didn't even bother going upstairs to check out my room. Instead, I shuffled past the pool, for a moment contemplating a swan dive to rinse off the road grit, but then I was carrying my phone, wallet, and keys to the Jeep, all of which may not fare so well after being completely submerged. Instead, I clomped my way across the motel parking lot and found myself, as luck would have it, standing outside the entrance to a conveniently located watering hole, a little dive bar called the Triangle, clearly marked by a garishly colored neon sign, prominently displayed above the door. The room inside was cool and dark, as most bars are, and felt good after spending most of the morning on the beach beneath the furnace that was the Florida sun. The place was sparsely occupied by a lone military man nursing a beer in the far corner of the room, and by the bartender busying himself washing and drying off shot glasses and returning them to a shelf behind the bar. Parking myself on the nearest bar stool, I took a moment to consider a libation, a poison of choice, or perhaps a signature concoction, something called a Triple L, undeniably a unique blend of hurricane-strength alcoholic goodness. After ordering up one, I jokingly informed the bartender that I was in the process of recreating a set of circumstances, get myself shit-faced drunk, and then wade out to the nearest shipwreck.
No shipwrecks around here, my friend.
The bartender replied.
Unless you're ready to strap on a tank and go scuba diving.
I could do that, I acknowledged, though historically speaking, I've been known to just wander off into the surf and lose track of time. The bartender chuckled.
Yeah, we've all been there, am I right?
I stared vacantly into the murky contents of my glass and thought to myself how wrong he was. No, buddy, I'm pretty sure that my brand of lost is unlike any other in the human experience. The pain of loss that is forever linked to the odd occurrence in the Canary Islands. Instinctively, I steered the topic of conversation to something less metaphysical and far, far removed from the empty hole in my heart. Raising my glass, I asked, "So where'd you come up with the name for this anyway?" The bartender grinned.
Triple limbo, all 3 sides of the Bermuda Triangle. That little slice of mystery out there in the deep blue sea.
The military man, the other solitary patron in the bar who had remained silent during my brief conversation with the bartender, tipped his glass of beer in my direction and chimed in.
Shipwrecks. Downed aircraft. A lot of brave souls, too. All just gone without a trace.
Gesturing to a photograph of 5 World War II-era airplanes that was framed and hanging front and center behind the bar, the man continued.
Flight 19. December 5th, 1945. They wandered off and got lost, too. In time, space, another dimension. Who's to say?
Intrigued, I picked up my drink and walked over to where the man was seated. Up close, I could see that he was Navy, also that he was very highly decorated. 1945? That's a bit like ancient history, don't you think? I asked. The man took a long sip from his beer and looked up at me, his stone-cold, blue-eyed gaze intimidating and very commanding. Without so much as a sideways glance, he picked up his officer's cap from the table and ran his thumb and index finger across the brim.
The United States Navy doesn't consider it a cold case. Not as long as there are 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers missing from the Naval Air Station up the road. My base of operation.
The conversation was getting interesting. No, downright eerily reminiscent of my own particular experience, so I decided to dig a little deeper. Can I buy you another beer? I asked.
Sure,
The officer replied.
beer tender,
He called across the room.
Dos Equis. And bring my friend another triple limbo. He's gonna need one if we're gonna discuss the triangle.
The bartender popped the top off another ice-cold beer and mixed up another atomic specialty drink for me. Figuring I better shore up the tab before I got too inebriated to remember I was buying drinks for the house, I staggered back to the bar and dug into my pants pocket for a wad of bills I'd crammed in there for just such an occasion. As I pulled the currency out of my pants, the silver chain I'd retrieved from the crab got hung up on my money clip and dangled down from my hand in plain view of the bartender.
Well, I'll be dogged.
He exclaimed.
Hey, Commander, we got us another swabby in the house.
For the first time since I found it wrapped around the crab's knobby leg, I realized that it was, in fact, a set of dog tags. No, sir, not me, I replied as I untangled the chain. These belong to a little crustacean down on the beach behind my motel. He was pulling them behind him, and I just decided to lighten his load a bit. I pulled a couple of bills out of my money clip and tossed them down on the bar, retrieved the drinks, and walked back over to where the Navy man was seated, handing him a fresh Dos Equis.
Thanks.
He said, taking the drink, and then added,
Hey, Charlie. Who the tags belong to, anyway? Some grunts of mine gone AWOL?
The bartender turned the rounded, tarnished metal tags end over end, inspecting them closely to read the embossed letters and numbers.
No, sir.
He replied,
Not unless he skipped out on you a while ago. These things are in bad shape.
scraping at the surface with the tip of his thumb. He must have cleared away enough grime to make out a name.
Looks like these tags belong to a second lieutenant, Tate C. Addison.
It's painful to watch something, or someone, suffering, dying. I suppose the American star was that way, injured, failing, her eventual prognosis terminal. Like some kind of virulent virus, the looters had finished the job the ocean had started, stealing her life away from within. On a bed of sand and rock, she rests on her side and waits for what is now inevitable. What if I could tell her that she has another destiny with an incredibly happy ending? Walking alone now in her vacant quarters, disbelievingly aware that this beautiful ship has 2 distinct fates. I started thinking about infinite parallel planes of existence, about how each potentially occupies an exact coordinate with all others, yet is separated by endless iterations that are vastly different in the end. I thought of the butterfly effect, chaos theory, how a single flutter of a butterfly's wings can radically upend the course of what was, or rather, what should have been. The American Star shipwreck could very well be a manifestation of faulty memory on my part, the Mandela effect. Had the ocean liner actually been restored, or did I just remember it that way in error? The evidence all around me would seem to suggest that my recollections were very, very wrong. Be all of this as it may, the ship was nevertheless a nexus, the origin of a storm that washed my dear Tate ashore at my feet. If I had any hope at all of finding him, all signs point here. With that singular thought in mind, I stepped out into the vast expanse that was the Great Hall. Bleak and crumbling such as it was, I could still easily pinpoint the exact spot on the dance floor, hear the echo of the band, and feel the electricity of his touch, as if he was still right here, waiting with an outstretched hand to sweep me off my feet. Reaching into the pocket of my flight suit, I retrieved the coin and rolled it heads, then tails in my hand. I had no reason to flip it. This wasn't a choice I needed random chance to help me make. As if the act itself had the power to set a chain of events in motion, I knelt down and gently placed the coin on the rotting floorboards. For a moment, I just stayed there staring down at it, mesmerized at how pristine it was and how it seemed so out of place in these surroundings. Tate would find it. I already knew that he would. Odd to think that the coin itself has no origin, no moment in which it was manufactured. It is placed here to be found. It is given as a promise. The promise is broken. The coin is placed here to be found, and so it goes. Tapping the headset lodged just inside the cusp of my ear, I said,
Control, this is Imari. I'm all finished here. My Mercedes is gone, so I'm going to have to climb up to the stack and take a swan dive into the vortex. Please, gentlemen, be sure to have a fix on my position. Don't want to end up in the lost and found.
Affirmative, Miss Imari.
Came the reply, distant and distorted.
Should not be a problem. Sorry to hear about the bends. I know that was your baby. Hey, by the way, I'm reasonably sure it's nothing. Probably a pond ripple of distorted space-time, but we're tracking an anomaly here on our end. It's minuscule, hardly worth mentioning. It's like a scratch, a scuff in the paint that coats the reality there. Like a subatomic blemish, a tea stain in the fabric of the universe, just a particle or two that has slipped over from our dimension to yours.
Keep the particles flowing, fellas,
I urged.
This was only the first leg of the journey. Tate is out there somewhere. I must find him.
No, Commander. I never served in the Navy or any other branch of the service. I do hold a private pilot's license and I do belong to the AOPA, but I guarantee that I've never logged any flight time for Uncle Sam, I said, then added, whoever this Addison guy is, he's not me. The commander, my newfound drinking buddy Theodore Sutton, glanced over at me as we strode side by side across the tarmac of the Naval Training Center, on course to who knows where.
I must say I'm inclined to believe you, Tate. You're not encrusted with 70-year-old barnacles. You don't even live around here. Wouldn't rule out a relative, though. You don't happen to have a long-lost uncle that served, do you? Family member you might have been named after?
Not to my knowledge, Commander, I told him. Besides, both of my parents were Canadian. Came to the States long after World War II. Sutton shook his head and scoffed.
Damn. That's a real deal-breaker there. Oh, by the way, call me Theo. I'm off duty and you're a civilian. No need to keep up the formalities. Anyway, I still feel that somehow this is more than just coincidence. Planets in line or something like that. Tate, my boy, I'm just drunk enough to put my money where my mouth is.
I chuckled. Yeah, last time I did that, I got stranded on a shipwreck. The commander clapped me on the back as we started descending a flight of pristine concrete stairs, leading down to an equally pristine pier, where several impressive seagoing vessels were anchored. I'm guessing I should be able to identify ship designations by now, but I'm assuming that the two vessels were either battleships or destroyers. No matter in the end, since we continued walking past both of them, apparently headed toward the end of the pier, where a small submarine was moored.
You're not claustrophobic, are you, Tate?
Sutton inquired as we stepped up beside the craft. I looked over at him and smirked. Would it matter if I said yes?
Not really,
He confirmed.
though I'd be surprised if you got spooked by a frenzy of man-eating sharks after all those triple limbos you tipped back.
Stepping over the short distance to the sub, Sutton twisted a lever at the base of the conning tower, then tipped it forward on a set of hinges with the soft hiss of escaping oxygen. Down inside the opening were two seats, both situated behind an elaborate panel of gauges and dials. One of the seats, I assume, was intended for me. The commander reached out his hand, and I took it without a second thought. You see, I suddenly realized that an opportunity was presenting itself, perhaps a gift shark like the ones I was now too drunk to fear. Before I could shimmy my way down and be seated, Sutton pulled a life vest from an onboard storage cabinet and handed it to me.
Put this on. It's the closest thing to a seatbelt I can offer,
He said, winking. The opportunity I mentioned was simply this. A high-ranking naval officer was, without question, offering to take me directly into the heart of the Bermuda Triangle in a submarine. Granted, my helmsman was as drunk as a skunk, but then, under normal circumstance, I doubt would have been so open to exploring paranormal possibilities. The most notorious point on a map for unexplained disappearances lay directly ahead, and I was looking for safe passage, a one-way ticket to elsewhere. As soon as one of the dockhands had cast off the ropes, we got underway, the sub propelling us out across open ocean at a surprisingly rapid clip.
We use this little guy for recon and undersea rescue operations, mostly.
Sutton told me.
So don't worry. We're not interfering with any regular duties. We typically just keep it on standby. So if a scramble call comes in, we're ready for it.
About an hour later, monotony and a general lull in the conversation resulting from the early warning signs of an oncoming hangover led me to focus my attention away from how bad I was feeling, and I Googled the Bermuda Triangle to see what might come up. At first, the only detail that unnerved me was the fact that Bermuda was over 1,000 miles distant from Fort Lauderdale. The commander didn't smell bad or anything. It's just that taking a cruise that far into the Atlantic seemed foolhardy for a decision made under the influence. "How far are we going, anyway?" I blurted out. Sutton looked over at me with a knowing expression.
You just Googled the distance to Bermuda, didn't you?
I nodded. "Isn't that where we're going?" The commander directed my attention to the flickering conical radar scope before us. Retrieving a small stylus from the pocket of his coat, he tapped the glass surface once, then twice, and finally 3 times, which, in turn, automatically connected the dots to form a 3-pointed, glowing orange frame.
This, Mr. Addison, delineates the boundary of a triangle. The vertices converge at Bermuda, Miami, and San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Tapping a 4th time illuminated yet another line, this one defining a smooth arc out from the Florida coast.
This is us. I'm retracing the approximate flight path of the missing Avengers out to the point at which time contact was lost. Now, don't get your hopes up, Tate. We'll dive down and have a look around, just like dozens of rescue crews, scientific researchers, and crackpot journalists have been doing since the day after the planes disappeared.
I ran a hand through my tangled hair and sighed. What makes you think there's anything else to see this time out? Sutton rifled around beneath the cusp of his life vest until he located the tarnished set of dog tags, holding them out to me.
These,
he stated matter-of-factly,
didn't just randomly wrap themselves around a hermit crab leg. Somehow they traced back to you. Can't say how or why, but that's what we're here to find out. Go ahead, Lieutenant Addison. Put 'em on. No matter how incredible it may seem, I still think they do belong to you.
Of course, I had observed the upper decks of the shipwreck upon my arrival, just not at close range, certainly not close enough to reveal the bleak condition being endlessly inflicted by the elements. Now, here I was, working my way back up to the stack and subsequently the vortex, making my getaway and leaving with less than I had brought along with me. Certainly not a productive endeavor. Not worth all the time, energy, and expense needed to fling my Mercedes and I backwards in a counterclockwise waltz. Who can say? Perhaps, if closure were the ultimate goal, I've succeeded. But then, it is a hollow victory to be sure. Reaching the last chapter in this love story and realizing it is time to write the end before we get to live the happily ever after? Not fair. No, not fair at all. I ascended a rusted metal staircase and then 2 more, finally reaching the top deck for the first time, witnessing at close range the incredible energy harnessed to bring me here. They called it an Einstein-Rosen bridge, or a Lorentzian traversable wormhole. The first of its kind to be conjured in a laboratory. Conjured at the behest of my father, the wealthiest man alive. Well, technically not yet, not at this particular moment in time. Here now, I doubt that even the likes of Elon Musk would be much more than a twinkle in his mother's eye. But then I digress. Anyway, there it was. A doorway between dimensions, awesome and majestic, dangerous and unpredictable, turning high into the sky above me like a man-made tornado. Having spent years of my life planning for this journey, I found the theories and research of Kip Thorne to be of the most interest to me. So much so that I dubbed the act of hurling oneself into the wormhole Kip's Skip. Mr. Thorne did not disappoint. I was now living proof that these theories had a basis in fact. Time travel and multi-dimensional wanderlust were real. And, I conjectured, if I could do it once, I can do it again, and again, as long as it takes. Tapping my comm link, I said,
Control, I'd like to come home now. Let me know when I should do a little Kip skip and a jump.
Always the humorist, my counterpart back in the future quipped,
Surely, Kapera. You'll remember to pack the ruby slippers, yes? Click 3 times and no place like home?
With a sarcastic little giggle, I replied,
Not this time out, darling. Sadly, I didn't quite make it over the rainbow.
I didn't catch sight of the anomaly until we were already right on top of it. Sorry, poor choice of words. Beneath it, actually, submerged about 30 fathoms and trolling ahead a few clicks at a time, our forward motion hindered by what seemed to be a slight churning rotation in the water, enough that our course was being altered, an unpredictable situation beneath the surface where the ocean floor is littered with sharp objects, many of them quite capable of tearing a lethal hole in a submarine. Neither portholes nor periscope were giving us much to go on either. The froth, a telltale signature that the water all around us was highly oxidized, clouded the view with tiny, shimmering bubbles, completely obscuring any kind of useful observation. Sutton held a white-knuckle grip on the rudder controls, focused and ready to make any possible split-second course correction to avoid collision. As I peered down into the soft green glow of the sonar, I could see several telltale blobs that indicated something that was potentially in our gracefully swirling path, amorphous shapes that were most likely outcroppings of rock or large coral reefs. Then, something else popped up at the outer fringes of the scope, something not amorphous or asymmetrical at all. Even displayed as nothing more than an inverted silhouette, the object in question had a singular fuselage, connected to wings and a tail. "Commander, are you seeing this?" I asked, disbelieving.
I'm seeing something.
He responded,
But for God's sake, call me Theo. We're drinking buddies. Remember?
Sutton started a turn in the blip's general direction, compensating for the drift as the current became stronger and pushed back against our advance.
I make that to be an aircraft of some designation. Funny thing though, Tate, she's not resting on the bottom, not floating either, unless our sonar is picking up what amounts to a modern-day Flying Dutchman. I'm at a loss.
"It's the triangle, Theo," I responded. "I think we just located at least one of your missing Avengers."
You may be right.
Sutton acknowledged.
We've searched this area many, many times for sunken wreckage and came up empty-handed. Whatever we're seeing, it hasn't been out there for very long.
As Sutton vented the ballast tanks to resurface, I continued to watch the flickering green signature of the airplane as it seemed to be turning end over end and counterclockwise simultaneously, a strange pirouette not typically seen as an aircraft maneuver. I suppose the swirling water could be responsible for the odd movements, the current causing it to dip and spin like a bobber on a fishing line. Still, something unnerved me about the whole of it. Maybe a thought coaxed to life by Theo's Flying Dutchman remark. The plane wasn't floating, it was levitating. Then, all at once, the conning tower broke above the waterline. It took several seconds longer for the liquid distortion pouring down the porthole glass to clear, before the bizarre scene outside started taking shape.
Tie my legs and call me Doggy,
Sutton exclaimed.
That's one of them right there. Number 3 pilot Joseph T. Bossy, ensign, USNR. Crew Herman A. Thielander, seaman, first class, USNR. Bert E. Ballock, Jr., seaman, first class, USN.
The commander's recall of the flight crew was impressive to be sure, though I saw no evidence of survivors waiting for rescue. Just a lone airplane, tipped upright with nearly all the tail section obscured below the ocean's surface. Throwing caution to the wind, Sutton released the watertight seal and pushed the conning tower open, ready, I suppose, to put a decades-old question mark to rest, regardless of the potential danger. "Hey, sailor, wait for me," I shouted as I scrambled up from my chair after him. I had just managed to get both knees on solid metal when I heard Sutton exclaim,
"What in the name of everything holy?"
With that, I stood up next to him and looked up. Now, you all know me pretty well. You know about my ride on the American Star, as a floundering shipwreck, and as a floating hotel. You know I once climbed on top of a runaway railroad car and went toe-to-toe with Sasquatch. I once rode a Soviet Buran orbiter into the black depths of space. You could almost say I've seen it all. The vision before me proved that I had nothing over on the strange and inexplicable. 4 of the 5 missing Avenger torpedo bombers drifted like untethered balloons above us, floating so slowly that their motion was nearly imperceptible. The 5th aircraft, the one we picked up on sonar, was partially underwater, but seemed to be moving in unison with the others, unaffected by the ocean current. Aside from the wear and tear you might expect for a used but nice warbird, the planes appeared to be essentially undamaged, even potentially airworthy. Even the Avenger with its tail in the drink eventually lifted higher in the air and showed no sign of being waterlogged. As the entire otherworldly vista started to completely sink in, it was clear that we were now contained inside the gigantic maw of a spiraling circular wall of airborne water, reaching out into the distance for as far as the eye could see. Surrounded on all sides by an apparently non-destructive waterspout. Well, Commander, there are your missing airplanes. Too bad the crews aren't still here with them. We could probably deploy an inflatable life raft and tow them back to base.
Yeah,
Sutton responded somberly.
not much chance of recovering the aircraft either, I imagine. This phenomena will most likely be gone by the time I could get a carrier out here to retrieve them.
Then, a thought came. If all this was somehow happening for a reason, even if the notion was outwardly foolhardy, it remained the single best hope to throw me back in the paranormal mix. Can you move us closer to the plane with its tail in the water? I asked. I want to get a closer look.
And do. Tate.
Sutton responded.
You looking for anything specific?
Not just anything, I responded. Someone. Very specific. If my hunch is correct, I'm starting down my next method of transport to elsewhere. Sutton was already steering a course in the right direction, the sub-screw trolling gradually toward the top of the Avenger's fuselage behind the cockpit. That will just about do it, I called back at him as I jumped over and caught hold of the gap between the cockpit lip and the canopy.
Tate, my boy,
Sutton observed.
what the hell are you planning on doing? Under normal circumstances, a TBM Avenger torpedo bomber requires a lengthy flat-top carrier or runway to get airborne. You might want the tanks topped off as well. These beasts get hungry for go-go juice in no time.
Maybe so, I replied, though these are hardly normal circumstances. Sutton looked up at me as I pulled myself into the cockpit and sat down behind the instrument panel.
You know, I could have you brought up on charges for stealing a naval aircraft.
Sutton shouted, half in jest. Send me a bill, my friend, I told him. We'll settle up next time around. The commander let out a loud belly laugh that echoed around inside the vortex.
What makes you think there'll be a next time, Mr. Addison? I'd say your destination is a long way off.
You're probably right, I confirmed. Charge it to my Amex card. The Shore Winds Beach Motel has the number on file. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Thanks for the lift. Sutton laughed again.
You're very welcome, Tate.
Then, straightening and extending me a proper military salute, he added,
I hope you find who you're looking for.
Giving the commander a thumbs up, I did a quick check of the oil pressure and fuel level, relieved that there was still enough petrol in the tanks to get airborne and maintain level flight for a while. The starter groaned as the prop started to spin, grudgingly at first, finally turning over with a resounding bang and a thick black cloud of smoke erupting from the exhaust. As the engine spun up to full throttle, I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised when the sudden air disturbance set the plane in motion, drifting upward through the vortex on what seemed like a complete absence of gravity. Strapping myself down, I took hold of the control stick and fixed my gaze up into the slowly churning maelstrom overhead. Kapera, my love, I'm on my way back. Commander Sutton departed the strange region shortly after the Avenger, flown by our illustrious Tate Addison, disappeared without a trace high into the sinuous cloud formation overhead. Had he not been so single-mindedly focused on plotting a return trip to the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Sutton might have noticed a rusted-out, derelict airplane resting on the dark ocean floor beneath him. As the screw from his single-engine submarine coursed by and vanished in the murky distance, a pair of corroded metal dog tags, caught on the broken canopy frame, kicked up in the propeller's wake to flutter momentarily and then sink back down into the ruined cockpit, disturbing a tiny fiddler crab hiding in the broken instrument panel. And so it goes. The airplane designated number 3 of 5 missing Avengers, most recently piloted by yet another brave aviator gone missing, traveling across that lost realm we like to call thin air. Final log entry, scribbled in the flight log of TBM Avenger 3, lost and finally found 100 years to the day after it disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle.
Little did I know as I was crisscrossing the hands on a clock, Kapera had initiated her own search for me after my disappearance from the future. Sadly, like the needle lost in a haystack of 1,000 yesterdays and tomorrows, we were each on opposite ends of the hourglass.
Episode 14 of the Thin Air podcast anthology, The Passenger, Season 2, Chapter 5, Lost and Found, was written, produced, directed, narrated, and told by R.J. Lonsdale. The voice of Kapera Imari was performed by Nancy Cooper Wood, and the voices of the Triangle bartender and future scientist were performed by Mark W. Wood. The voice of Commander Theodore Sutton was performed by Gary Boodhoo, and the voices of Tate Addison and the Beachcomber were performed by R.J. Lonsdale. Audio production for this Thin Air episode by Mark W. Wood of Wood Media Studio, Incorporated. Music compositions used in this episode include Star-Crossed by Mark W. Wood, Echoes in Time and Spring Thaw by Kevin MacLeod, Wake Up in the Dark by CAOG Music, and Mysterious City, all licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. This has been an R.J. Lonsdale Flyby Studios presentation.